So we're going to work on synchronizing our animation with the shoot effect that we want. We set up our animation to run on a loop for the main reason being that we want the character to be able to shoot as if firing from a machine gun. So as long as the player pulls the trigger, the animation will loop and the player character's animations will show them constantly putting up their arm and firing again and again and again as long as the trigger is pulled. So to make this sync up with the animation, we're going to open up the anim shoot here and find the frame at which we want the projectile to actually be launched. So if we scrub along the timeline, we can see that position 3 is where the projectile should actually be launched. So we're going to add some stuff here, sort of an anim notify, a makeshift anim notify, to this event graph to check for that frame and launch the projectile when that frame and only when that frame has been reached. So we'll use a reference for our sprite and we'll drag off of here and add a get playback position in frames. And we'll drag from the return value, the integer here, and we'll see when this integer equals the frame value of 3. We'll check to see if that condition is true. So we'll right drag off of here and do a branch check on the Boolean value. And we'll connect these nodes. And let's make a little more room. I think there should be enough room here. When it's true, we want it to fire the projectile. So there we go. We connect the true node. When it's false, we want it to run on a really fast delay, literally a duration of 0, like an instant check every frame. And as soon as it hits true, it fires a projectile. And the next thing we want to do is we want this to loop back in on itself. So let's see here. Actually, no, we should add a branch check for shooting here. That should be better. We want to make sure that the trigger is still being pulled. If it's been released, this could look weird. So let's see if we fire this now. Okay, it still looks good. It's coming right out of where we want it to. Okay, good. So that works. It's actually firing when the arm's fully extended. That's what we wanted to see. Let's just clean this up a little bit. And let's see. So again, this is being looped. Right here, it's set on the, as I said before, it's set on the update animation event, which is looping. And of course, that's being called per tick right here off of event tick. So what do we need to do to the shooting event to actually make this loop work? To actually stop if you release the trigger, but continue if it's continuously pulled? Well, we need to do another sort of anim notify here that checks for a different frame. In this case, it's going to check for the last frame. What this means is it will play the animation all the way through before looping back again. It will ensure that the loop begins at the end of the animation. So we'll double check the last frame here. We can see that it's 5. Although for some reason our 12 disappeared. Let's go back and add the 12 here, because this will give us a smoother loop on the effect we're trying to get. We'll copy this. We'll paste this again here. Not sure why that disappeared, but it wasn't saved. All right, so there we go. 12 brings it back to the initial position, and that will count as our final frame that we'll check for in the event graph. So it's set to 0. We'll set it to 6. Again, we'll do a Boolean branch check here. We'll connect it to this branch. Here we go. So a couple of things need to happen here. If it's false, we want it to, again, do an infinite loop. Well, not infinite, I should say a finite loop until it finds a true condition. And when the true condition is reached, meaning the last frame of the animation has been reached, the gun is lowered, That means it's safe for the animation to loop back around to the beginning of the firing, which meaning the gun gets raised, and then of course, when the gun is raised to the firing position, the next projectile gets launched. And that gives us a loop. All right, so to test this out, we set up our anim shoot to work with our event in the event graph so that when I do one of two things, which is one is hold down the trigger constantly, the character shoots for as long as I hold down the trigger, and they shoot on the actual frame that we want, which is the arm is fully extended and the barrel sort of flares fully out there. That's one way, and I'm holding down the trigger now. We can see that's working properly. The other is if I pull the trigger once and let go, also, it can be fired this way with the same timing coming out at the same muzzle flash, the whole thing. So it's working both ways. But again, if I hold down the trigger, this is a tunable thing you might want to check on for your game. But say, for instance, in my game, I find this rate of fire is too slow. As I'm holding down the trigger, it's coming out, sure, but it's too slow for me. So we can go and change this. I'll close the play window here. And if I open up anim shoot, because we've tied the firing directly to the frame rate of the animation, in other words, for when frame 3 is reached, say we want to reach frame 3 faster, to fire faster. Well, we can actually increase the frames per second now to speed it up. So if we increase this 25, and we save this, and we go hit play now, when I hold down the trigger, we can see it fires much faster. And that's an easy way for us to speed up the rate at which the player can fire. Now, this could be useful in other ways. Say you wanted to have a scripted power-up in your level. You could make it so that the scripted power-up just changes the character's shooting animation speed, which would in turn, of course, speed up the character's actual firing in the game, and it could affect the gameplay a lot more that way. So with this in place, this gives us our fully functional shooting behavior and all the relevant animation states and impacts that we need. To review this module, we looked at inputs and booleans for shooting. That included creating a player input that sets and checks for boolean conditions to avoid unwanted player actions. We looked at spawning projectile and impact actors. This made use of the spawn actor from class function to create moving projectiles that originate at the player character and sprite impact effects that originate at the point of collision. We also looked at collision detection for shooting. Here we created collision events and checked for collision types to determine when to spawn an impact actor. We looked at animating projectile and impact sprites. This involved importing sprites for them and animating them in the flipbook editor. We also looked at adjusting sprites and flipbooks for shooting animations. This showed how we can fix sprite offsets when certain keyframes are misaligned. And finally, we looked at syncing the keyframes for shooting, where we showed how to synchronize the projectile launch with a desired keyframe in the shooting animation.